I am Verna Kincaid, and my world revolves around my 8-year-old son, Toby. Being a single mom in a small Ohio town isn't glamorous, but every scraped knee I bandage and every bedtime story I read feels like a victory. Toby's my anchor. His giggle could light up the darkest day. But 3 weeks ago, that light flickered. He spiked a fever that wouldn't quit, and now he's in the ICU, hooked to machines that beep like they're judging me. I haven't left his side, sleeping in a hospital chair that smells like bleach and despair. My family, the illustrious Kincaids, haven't shown up. They're too busy polishing their perfect image, wealthy, connected, and obsessed with control. They've always seen me as the screw-up, the one who got pregnant at 19 and didn't marry the father. To them, I'm a smudge on their pristine legacy. Growing up, I was the odd one out. My older siblings, Harlan and Sissy, were the golden kids. Harlan with his law degree, Sissy with her charity galas. Me? I was the dreamer, sketching designs for clothes in the margins of my math homework. I'd spend hours at the library, teaching myself to sew, imagining a world where my creations made people feel seen. My family called it a hobby and told me to get serious. They wanted me to fit their mold, marry rich, smile for the cameras, and never make waves. I tried to please them, but it was like forcing a square peg into a round hole. When Toby came along, they acted like I'd committed a felony. "You've embarrassed us," my mother Doreen said, her voice sharp as a paper cut. My father Willard just shook his head like I was a lost cause. Now, with Toby fighting for his life, I'm clinging to hope and coffee that tastes like regret. I've built something of my own, a small online business selling my designs, but I've kept it secret from them. They'd only find a way to tear it down. Last night, as I held Toby's hand, his monitor screaming alarms, my phone buzzed. It was Harlan, reminding me of the annual Kincaid family dinner. "You will be there, Verna," he said, like it was a court summons. I wanted to scream that my son might not make it through the night, but I just hung up. Then, at 2 a.m., the doctor pulled me aside with news that stopped my heart. I never imagined my phone would ring at the perfect moment. Before I tell you how that call changed everything, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this ends. I sat there staring at the hospital's peeling wallpaper, replaying the doctor's words. Toby's condition was worse than they thought. A rare infection, maybe treatable, but the odds weren't great. I felt like I was drowning, but I couldn't let go of his hand. My family didn't know, didn't care. They were probably sipping wine at some country club, planning how to parade their generosity at the dinner. I'd always been invisible to them, unless they needed someone to blame. When I was 12, I won a state art contest and my parents didn't even show up to the ceremony, but when Harlan got into Yale they threw a party that cost more than our car. That's the Kincaid way. Love is a transaction and I've never had the right currency. Toby stirred, his small chest rising under the tubes. I whispered to him about the superhero cape I'd designed for him when he woke up. My business, Verna's Threads, was my lifeline, a secret I'd nurtured for years. It started with a few dresses I sold on Etsy, but it grew into a brand people loved. I'd poured every spare minute into it, sewing after Toby went to bed, teaching myself marketing on YouTube. Last month, a big retailer reached out, wanting to carry my line nationwide. It could change our lives, but I hadn't told a soul, especially not my family. They'd call it a fluke, or worse, try to take credit. As I sat by Toby, I wondered if I'd ever get to tell him how far we'd come. The hospital was quiet, but my heart was loud, screaming for a miracle. Toby's monitors hummed, a steady reminder of how fragile everything was. I leaned back in the hospital chair, my eyes burning from lack of sleep, and let my mind drift to the past. Growing up in the Kincaid house was like living in a museum. Everything polished, nothing touched. My family had old money, the kind that came with expectations heavier than the chandeliers in our dining room. Harlan and Sissy were the prized exhibits, always shining under my parents' spotlight. Harlan was the charmer, captain of the debate team, destined for greatness. Sissy was the darling, her every move, ballet recitals, honor roll, celebrated like a national holiday. Me? I was the shadow in the corner, unnoticed unless I spilled something. I remember being 15, sitting at the dinner table while my mother Doreen gushed over Sissy's acceptance to a fancy summer program. "You're our star, Sissy," she said, her diamond earrings catching the light. I'd just gotten a scholarship to an art camp, but when I mentioned it, my father Willard barely looked up from his steak. "That's nice, Verna, but focus on something practical," he muttered. Harlan smirked, like my dreams were a joke. That night, I cried into my sketchbook, drawing dresses that felt more real than my family's love. It wasn't just one moment, it was 1,000. Every time I tried to shine, they turned the light elsewhere. When I was 17, I designed a gown for the school talent show. I spent months sewing it. My fingers pricked raw, staying up late to get the stitching perfect. It was sapphire blue, with a neckline that made me feel like I could walk into any room and belong. I won first place, and for a second, I thought my family might finally see me. But at the after-party, Doreen pulled me aside. "Don't get cocky," she said. "You're not cut out for that world." Meanwhile, Harlan's boring speech about tax law got a standing ovation at some club event, and my parents threw a dinner to celebrate. They framed his certificate. My gown? It ended up in a closet, forgotten. The worst was when I got pregnant with Toby. I was 19, scared out of my mind, but already in love with the tiny life inside me. I told my family, hoping for support. Instead, Doreen called it a disgrace. Willard offered to pay for me to fix it, like Toby was a problem to erase. Harlan said I'd ruined my future, and Sissy just looked at me with pity, like I was a stray dog. I moved out, got a tiny apartment, and worked 2 jobs while taking night classes. I sent them pictures of Toby's first steps, his toothy grin, but they never responded. Yet when Sissy got engaged to some hedge fund guy named Percy, they flew her to Paris for a dress fitting. That's when I knew. Their love was a currency I'd never earn. Toby's hand twitched in mine, pulling me back to the hospital room. I'd spent years trying to prove I was enough, but every milestone I hit, every late-night shift, every diaper changed, was invisible to them. My siblings were their success story, their proof of perfection. I was the footnote, the one who didn't fit. Even now, with Toby fighting to breathe, they hadn't called to check on him. They didn't know about Verna's threads, how I'd turned my sketches into a business that paid our bills. They didn't know I'd been invited to pitch to a national retailer, a deal that could make us secure. To them, I was still the girl who embarrassed them, the one who chose motherhood over their approval. I kissed Toby's forehead, his skin clammy under my lips. The Kincaids could keep their spotlight. I'd built my own light, dim but steady, and it was enough for me and Toby. But as the family dinner loomed, I felt the old weight of their judgment creeping in. I didn't know then that I was about to walk into a storm that would change everything. Toby's shallow breaths kept time with the hospital's hum, and I clung to his hand like it could anchor us both. Staring at the IV dripping into his arm, I let my mind wander to the one thing that had kept me sane through all this. Verna's threads. It was my secret, my rebellion against the Kincaids' dismissal, born in the quiet hours when the world slept and I refused to break. It started small, a way to keep my hands busy after Toby went to bed. I'd always loved designing, clothes that told stories that made people feel bold or soft or seen, but it was more than a hobby. It was my way of proving I wasn't the failure my family thought I was. The aha moment came 3 years ago when Toby was 5. I was scrolling through social media, exhausted from a shift at the diner, when I saw a mom post about wanting a dress for her daughter's birthday, something unique, not mass-produced. On a whim, I messaged her, offering to make one. I spent a week sketching, cutting fabric on my kitchen table, sewing until my eyes blurred. When I delivered the dress, a sunny yellow number with hand-stitched daisies, the mom cried. Her daughter twirled in it, beaming. That $50 I earned felt like $1,000,000. I posted a picture online and suddenly, I had 10 more orders. Verna's Threads was born. The struggle was brutal. I taught myself everything: how to build a website, how to market on a budget, how to source ethical fabrics. I'd sew until 3 a.m., then wake up at 6 to get Toby to daycare. There were nights I cried, thinking I'd bitten off more than I could chew. Once, I messed up an order for a wedding dress and had to refund the customer out of my grocery money. Toby and I ate peanut butter sandwiches for a week. But every time I wanted to quit, I'd look at him sleeping, his little chest rising, and I'd keep going. I wasn't just building a business, I was building a future where we didn't need the Kincaids' handouts or approval. The success came quietly, then exploded. By last year, Verna's threads had a loyal following. People loved my story, a single mom making clothes with heart. I started getting orders from across the country, then Canada, even the UK. I hired a part-time assistant, a sweet woman named Mavis who worked from her garage. 6 months ago, I got an email that stopped my heart. A major retailer, Harlow & Co., wanted to meet. They'd seen my designs online and thought I could be their next big brand. If I nailed the pitch, they'd carry my line in stores nationwide. It was the kind of deal that could pay for Toby's college, maybe even a house. But I didn't tell anyone, not even Mavis. I was too afraid it'd fall apart, or worse, that my family would find out and try to claim it. I kept it hidden because the Kincaids had a way of poisoning everything. When I was a kid, I'd overheard Doreen brag about supporting my art, like she'd ever bought me so much as a sketch pad. If they knew about Verna's threads, they'd either dismiss it or try to control it. Maybe demand a cut for raising me. I couldn't risk that. So I worked in secret, stashing my earnings in a separate account, building a life they couldn't touch. Every dress I shipped was a middle finger to their judgment, proof I was more than their disappointment. Toby stirred, his fingers curling around mine. I whispered, "We're almost there, buddy." The Harlow deal was days away, but all I could think about was him getting better. The family dinner hung over me like a storm cloud. I didn't want to go, didn't want to face their smug faces while Toby fought for his life. But Harlan's voice echoed in my head, "You will be there." I didn't know then that I was about to walk into a reckoning. Toby's hospital room felt like a bubble, the beeps and hums a strange lullaby. I hadn't left his side in days, my world shrinking to his clammy hand and the doctor's guarded updates. His infection was stubborn, resisting antibiotics, and every hour felt like a gamble. I kept whispering to him about the adventures we'd have when he woke up. Ice cream sundaes, trips to the zoo, maybe even a dog. But the truth was, I was terrified. My phone buzzed constantly. Texts from Mavis about Verna's threads, emails about the Harlow & Co. pitch. The meeting was in 3 days, a chance to take my business national, but I could barely think past Toby's next breath. Then there was the Kincaid family dinner, looming like a guillotine. Harlan's call had been clear: show up, or else. I tried to focus on Toby, but my mind kept drifting to the dinner. It was an annual ritual, held at my parents' sprawling estate outside Columbus. Doreen would play the gracious hostess, Willard the stern patriarch, while Harlan and Sissy basked in their approval. I'd always been the odd one out, invited out of obligation, not love. This year felt different, heavier. Toby was in the ICU, and I hadn't told them. Part of me wanted to scream it in their faces, but another part, the part that still craved their acceptance, kept quiet. I hated that part of myself. I'd spent years building Verna's threads, proving I didn't need them, but the thought of facing their judgment made my stomach twist. The night before the dinner, I got an email from Harlow & Co. They loved my portfolio and wanted a full presentation, numbers, vision, the works. If I pulled it off, it'd mean real security for Toby and me. I should have been ecstatic, but I was exhausted, running on vending machine snacks and adrenaline. I started drafting notes on my phone, hunched over Toby's bed, when a nurse, a kind woman named Thelma, tapped my shoulder. "You need a break, hon," she said. I shook my head, but she insisted, handing me a coffee. I stepped into the hall, staring at the linoleum, and called Mavis. "Can you handle the shop for a few days?" I asked. She didn't pry, just said, "Whatever you need, Verna." I didn't tell her about Toby or the dinner. I wasn't ready to let anyone in. Back in the room, I looked at Toby's pale face, the tubes snaking from his arms. I'd already arranged for Thelma to stay with him during the dinner. I couldn't miss it, not with Harlan's threat hanging over me. I didn't know what "or else" meant, but the Kincaids had a way of making you feel small. I packed a simple black dress, one of my own designs, and tried to steel myself. I'd go, play their game, and get back to Toby. But as I kissed his forehead, promising I'd be quick, my phone buzzed again. It was Sissy, texting a photo of her and her fiancé Percy at some gala. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow," she wrote, all exclamation points and fake warmth. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. I sat there, the hospital's fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and thought about Verna's threads. It was my lifeline, proof I'd made something real. The Harlow deal could change everything, but it felt distant, like a dream I didn't deserve. All I wanted was Toby to open his eyes. The dinner was a distraction, a reminder of the family who'd never seen me. I didn't know then that it'd be more than a distraction, it'd be a battlefield. As I tucked Toby's blanket around him, I whispered, "I'll make you proud, kid." I just hoped I could survive the night ahead. The Kincaid estate loomed like a fortress, all stone and ivy, glowing under the Ohio dusk. I pulled up in my beat-up hatchback, feeling like an intruder. My black dress, one of my own designs, hugged my frame, but I still felt exposed. Toby was stable for now. Thelma promised to text me updates, but leaving him at the hospital had torn me apart. I took a deep breath, clutching my purse, and walked to the front door. The air smelled of money and judgment, and I braced myself for the gauntlet. Doreen greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Verna, you made it," she said, her voice dripping with surprise, like I'd already failed by showing up. She wore a cream pantsuit, her pearls gleaming like tiny moons. Willard stood behind her, sipping scotch, his nod so curt it barely qualified. The foyer was a shrine to Kincaid perfection. Framed photos of Harlan's law firm, Sissy's charity awards, nothing of me or Toby. I followed them to the dining room where the table sparkled with crystal and silver. Harlan was there, adjusting his cufflinks, his wife, Nadine, beside him in a dress that screamed designer. Sissy fluttered in, her fiancé Percy trailing like a smug shadow. "Verna!" Sissy chirped, air-kissing my cheek. "You look tired." The dinner started with small talk, but every word was a jab. Harlan leaned forward, smirking. "Still playing with your little sewing project, Verna?" Nadine tittered like it was a cute quirk. I forced a smile, my hands clenched under the table. "It keeps me busy," I said, keeping Verna's threads under wraps. Doreen chimed in. "You should have gone to college, dear. Harlan's firm just won a big case." She beamed at him, and he preened, launching into a story about outsmarting some corporate rival. I nodded, my mind on Toby's monitors, willing my phone to stay silent. Sissy wasn't subtle either. "Percy's taking me to Milan next month," she said, twirling her wine glass. "You should visit sometime, Verna, if you can afford it." Percy chuckled, his eyes raking over my dress like it was from a thrift store. I wanted to tell them it was my design, that it had sold out online in hours, but I bit my tongue. Willard, quiet until now, fixed me with a stare. "You've been distant, Verna. Family comes first, you know." His tone was a warning, like I owed them my soul for being born a Kincaid. I mumbled something about work, but Doreen cut in. "Work? You mean that hobby of yours? Honestly, you could have done so much more." Each comment landed like a slap, their smiles sharp as knives. They didn't ask about Toby, not once. I'd almost told them when I arrived. But their coldness stopped me. Why give them ammunition? My phone buzzed in my purse and my heart lurched, but it was just Mavis, checking in about a shipment. I typed a quick reply, praying Thelma's next text would be good news. The meal dragged on, roast lamb, asparagus, conversation about their perfect lives. I felt like a ghost, present but unseen, my chair a reminder of their obligation to tolerate me. As dessert was served, some fussy tart Doreen bragged was flown in from Chicago. Harlan cleared his throat, his eyes glinting. "Verna, we need to talk about your place in this family." The room went quiet, and I felt the air shift, like a storm was about to break. Sissy looked down, Percy smirked, and Doreen's smile tightened. Willard just watched, his face unreadable. I gripped my fork, my pulse racing. Toby's face flashed in my mind, and I knew whatever came next would test every ounce of strength I had. Harlan's words hung in the air, heavy as the chandelier above us. The dining room felt smaller, the Kincaid's eyes pinning me like a bug on a board. I set my fork down, my hands trembling, and met Harlan's gaze. He leaned back, his lawyer's smirk sharp enough to cut glass. "We've been patient, Verna," he said, "but your choices reflect on us all." Doreen nodded. Her lips pursed like she'd tasted something sour. Willard's silence was louder than words, his stare daring me to argue. Sissy fiddled with her napkin, avoiding my eyes, while Percy just sipped his wine, enjoying the show. Nadine, Harlan's wife, tilted her head, her pity worse than their scorn. "Choices?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My mind was half in the hospital, with Toby's monitors and Thelma's last text. No change, holding steady. Harlan folded his hands like he was about to deliver a verdict. "You've embarrassed this family," he said. "Running off to play single mom, dabbling in your little crafts, ignoring your responsibilities to our name." Responsibilities? I wanted to laugh. The Kincaid's idea of responsibility was smiling for photos and marrying money. I'd been raising a kid, paying bills, building a business. They wouldn't know real responsibility if it bit them. Doreen jumped in, her voice syrupy but cold. We've given you every opportunity, Verna. We paid for that apartment when you got pregnant, offered to set you up with a proper husband. She meant the creepy banker they'd pushed on me when I was 20, a guy who smelled like cigars and entitlement. I'd said no, and they'd never forgiven me. Willard finally spoke, his gravelly tone final. You've chosen a path that doesn't align with our values. We can't keep supporting you. Supporting me? They hadn't sent a dime since I moved out, hadn't even sent Toby a birthday card. Harlan held up a hand, like a king silencing a crowd. We've decided, he said, to formally distance ourselves. You're no longer welcome in this family unless you change, get a real career, stop this nonsense with your sewing, and show some loyalty. The word disowned wasn't said, but it echoed in the room. Sissy gasped softly, but her eyes stayed on her plate. Percy smirked, like he'd won a bet. Nadine murmured, It's for the best. I felt like I'd been punched, the air sucked out of me. All those years of hoping they'd see me, love me, crumbled to dust. I opened my mouth to tell them about Toby, how he was fighting for his life while they played Dynasty. But the words stuck. They didn't deserve to know. They'd probably blame me for his illness, say I wasn't stable enough to raise him. My phone sat silent in my purse, and I prayed Thelma wouldn't text bad news now. I looked at each of them, Doreen's tight smile, Willard's stone face, Harlan's smugness, Sissy's cowardice. They thought they were cutting me off, but they were handing me freedom. Still, it hurt, a raw ache that made my chest tight. You don't get it, I said, my voice low but steady. I've never needed your approval. Harlan scoffed, but before he could reply, Doreen leaned forward. Don't be dramatic, Verna. You'll come crawling back when you fail. That's when my phone buzzed, loud enough to make Sissy flinch. I pulled it out, my heart in my throat, expecting Thelma. But the screen showed a different name, Clara from Harlow & Co. I hesitated, then answered, my voice barely a whisper. Hello? Clara's words hit like a lightning bolt, and the room spun as I realized what was happening. Clara's voice crackled through the phone, bright and urgent, cutting through the Kincaid's suffocating silence. Verna, we're blown away by your pitch deck, she said. Harlow & Co. wants to sign you. Exclusive contract, national rollout, starting next quarter. My breath caught, the words barely sinking in. The deal I'd dreamed of, the one that could secure Toby's future, was real. I mumbled a shaky, thank you, my eyes darting to the table where Harlan's smirk faltered. But before Clara could continue, she added, Oh, and check your email. Vogue just mentioned Verna's threads in their indie designer roundup. You're trending online. I hung up, my hands trembling, the room spinning like I'd stepped off a cliff. The Kincaids stared, their forks frozen mid-bite. Sissy's mouth hung open. Percy's wineglass tilted and Doreen's pearls seemed to choke her. Willard's eyes narrowed, like he sensed a shift but couldn't place it. Harlan recovered first, his voice sharp. Who was that, Verna? Don't tell me it's another one of your distractions. I could have laughed, but my phone buzzed again. This time Thelma. Her text was brief. Toby's fever broke. He's stable, asking for you. My heart soared, tears pricking my eyes. Toby was fighting back and my business was soaring. In that moment their judgment felt like static, irrelevant. I stood, my chair scraping the floor, and faced them. That was Harlow & Co., I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. They're signing Verna's threads for a national deal, and Vogue just called me a designer to watch. The words felt surreal, like they belonged to someone else. Sissy gasped, her napkin slipping to the floor. Nadine whispered, Vogue? Like it was a foreign word. Percy's smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl. Harlan leaned forward, his lawyer brain scrambling. You? A deal? What's the valuation? He demanded, like he was entitled to know. I ignored him, turning to Doreen. While you were planning this ambush, my son was in the ICU, fighting a rare infection. He's stable now, no thanks to any of you. The room went deathly quiet. Willard's glass clinked as he set it down, his face unreadable. Doreen's hand flew to her chest, but her shock felt performative, like she was acting for an audience. Sissy stammered, Toby, why didn't you say? I cut her off, because you never asked, not once. The truth hung there, raw and heavy. They hadn't cared enough to notice my absence, my fear, my fight. Harlan tried to regain control, his voice patronizing. "This is all very impressive, Verna. But don't get ahead of yourself. You'll need our guidance to manage this." Guidance? The audacity burned. They'd dismissed my dreams, ignored my son, and now they wanted a piece of my success? I felt the weight of years, every snub, every cold shoulder, fall away. Toby was my why, my strength. Verna's threads was mine, built from sleepless nights and stubborn hope. They had no claim to it. I grabbed my purse, my eyes locked on theirs. "You don't get to disown me and then cash in," I said. "I've been invisible to you my whole life, and I'm done begging for your love." Doreen's face twisted, like I'd slapped her. Willard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Sissy reached out, then stopped, her hand hovering. Percy muttered something about ungrateful, but I didn't care. The call from Clara, Thelma's text, they were my lifeline, proof I'd built something real. I turned to leave, my heart pounding but light, ready to get back to Toby. I stood in the Kincaids' dining room, my purse slung over my shoulder, the weight of their stares like a fading echo. Harlan's mouth opened, ready to spit some lawyerly comeback, but I didn't give him the chance. "Save it," I said, my voice sharp enough to slice through their pretense. "You've made your choice, and I've made mine." Doreen's hand fluttered to her pearls, her gasp rehearsed, like she was auditioning for a soap opera. Willard's face was stone, but his eyes flickered with something. Regret, maybe, or just discomfort. Sissy's lips trembled, her usual charm crumbling, while Percy muttered under his breath, probably calculating how to spin this for his buddies. Nadine just gaped, her perfect poise shattered by the idea that I, Verna, had outdone them. "You can't just walk away," Harlan said, his tone a mix of disbelief and condescension. "We're your family." Family? The word tasted bitter. Family doesn't ignore a child in the ICU, doesn't demand loyalty while offering none. I laughed, a short, hollow sound. "You stopped being my family the day you decided I wasn't worth seeing." I turned to Doreen, her face a mask of offense. "You bragged about supporting me, but you never even asked what I was building. Verna's Threads isn't a hobby, it's a brand. My brand, and it's bigger than your bank accounts." Sissy reached out, her voice small. "Verna, we didn't know about Toby." I spun on her, my anger flaring. "Because you didn't care to know. You were too busy planning your Milan trip to notice I was drowning." She flinched, and for a second I saw guilt in her eyes, but it wasn't enough. They'd all sat there sipping wine while I'd sat by Toby's bed praying he'd wake up. I looked at Willard, the man who'd once called me a disgrace for choosing motherhood. "You told me to fix my mistakes. Toby's not a mistake. He's my everything. And he's worth more than your approval." The room was silent, their smugness unraveling. Harlan tried one last jab. "You'll regret this, Verna. You can't make it without us." I smiled, cold and sure. "I already have." I pulled out my phone, opened the email from Clara at Harlow & Co. and held it up. "This is my future. National distribution, Vogue's attention, and not one of you had a hand in it." Percy snorted, but it was weak, like he knew he'd lost. Nadine whispered to Harlan, her eyes wide, probably realizing their socialite friends would eat this up. The Kincaids thrived on control, but I just yanked it away. I walked toward the door, my steps steady despite the adrenaline pumping through me. Doreen called after me, her voice shrill. "Verna, you're making a scene." I didn't look back. "Good," I said. "Maybe it'll wake you up." The foyer felt different now, less like a cage and more like a threshold. I passed the framed photos of Harlan and Sissy, their perfect lives immortalized, and felt nothing but relief. Outside, the night air was crisp, the stars bright above the estate's manicured lawn. I slid into my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. Toby was waiting, and so was my future. As I drove back to the hospital, the Kincaids' voices faded, replaced by Clara's words and Thelma's text. Verna's Threads was real, Toby was fighting, and I was free. I'd spent years chasing their love, but I didn't need it anymore. The road stretched ahead, leading me back to the only family that mattered. My son, my strength, my reason to keep going. The hospital's fluorescent lights greeted me like an old friend, their hum a stark contrast to the Kincaids' polished dining room. I rushed to Toby's room, my heart lighter despite the ache of the night. Thelma was there, her warm smile a balm. "He's been asking for you," she said, squeezing my arm. Toby's eyes fluttered open, weak but bright, and he whispered, "Mom?" I sank beside him, tears spilling as I kissed his forehead. His fever was down, his small hand curling into mine. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we might make it. The Kincaid's rejection still stung, but here, with Toby, I was home. Later that evening, I stepped into the hospital cafeteria for coffee and found Mavis waiting. She'd driven an hour after I texted her about Toby's improvement, bringing a bag of my favorite muffins and a hug that nearly broke me. "You don't have to do this alone," she said, her voice firm but kind. We sat at a wobbly table, the cafeteria buzzing with tired nurses and worried families. Mavis wasn't family by blood, but she'd been there, helping with Verna's threads, cheering me on, never asking for anything but trust. I told her everything, the dinner, the disowning, Clara's call, Vogue's shout-out. Her eyes widened, then she laughed, loud and free. "Verna, you're a damn force." We were joined by Thelma off her shift and a hospital volunteer named Otis, who'd been sneaking Toby extra jello. They weren't the Kincaids with their wealth and status, but they were real. Otis shared stories of his grandkids, his gravelly laugh filling the space. Thelma talked about her nursing school days, her pride in helping kids like Toby. Mavis pulled up Verna's Threads website on her phone, showing off new orders pouring in after the Vogue mention. "Look at this," she said, grinning. "You're blowing up." For the first time that night, I smiled. Really smiled. Surrounded by people who saw me, not my failures. It was so different from the Kincaid dinner, where every word was a transaction, every glance a judgment. There I'd been a prop, tolerated until I stepped out of line. Here in this dingy cafeteria, I was Verna, mom, designer, fighter. No one cared about my last name or my bank account. They cared about Toby's recovery, my dreams, the way I kept going. Otis raised his coffee cup in a mock toast to Verna, who's kicking ass and taking names. We laughed, the sound echoing, and I felt a warmth I hadn't known I'd been missing. I thought about Sissy's fake tears, Harlan's smug ultimatums, Doreen's pearls and Willard's silence. They'd offered conditional love, tied to their rules, their image. But Mavis, Thelma, Otis, they gave me something better, acceptance, no strings attached. They didn't know the full scope of Verna's threads, or the Harlow deal, but they didn't need to. They believed in me because I was me, not because of what I could do for them. That was family, the kind I'd chosen, the kind I'd fight for. As we finished our coffee, Mavis leaned in. "What's next, boss?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. I thought of Toby, of the Harlow contract, of the life I was building. The Kincaids had tried to break me, but they'd only made me stronger. "We keep going," I said. "For Toby, for us." The cafeteria clock ticked past midnight, but I wasn't tired. I was ready to face the hospital bills, the business pitch, the future. With these people by my side, I knew I wasn't alone. Toby's recovery was slow but steady, each small improvement, a stronger grip, a sleepy smile, feeling like a miracle. I spent my days by his bedside, juggling hospital visits with Verna's threads. The Harlow & Co. deal was moving fast, with contracts piling up and Mavis handling orders like a pro. But the Kincaids' disowning lingered, a bruise I couldn't ignore. Their silence was deafening. No calls, no texts, not even a fake apology. I'd walked out of their estate feeling free. But now I had to make that freedom real. It meant setting boundaries, ones they couldn't cross, to protect Toby and myself. I started with my phone. Harlan had a habit of leaving voicemails that sounded like court orders, and Sissy's texts were all sugar-coated guilt trips. I blocked their numbers, my finger hesitating only for a second. Doreen and Willard got the same treatment, no more access to me or Toby. It felt drastic but necessary. They'd never respected my life, and I wasn't giving them another chance to hurt us. I told Mavis what I'd done, expecting her to raise an eyebrow, but she just nodded. "Good for you," she said. "You don't owe them a thing." The harder part was the practical stuff. The Kincaids had always dangled their wealth like a leash, offering help with strings attached. When Toby was born, they'd paid for my apartment's first month, then held it over me for years. I checked my finances, crunching numbers in the hospital's quiet hours. Verna's Threads was doing well, better than well, with the Vogue mention driving sales. The Harlow deal would bring in more, enough to cover Toby's medical bills and secure our future. I didn't need their money, and that realization was like shedding a heavy coat. I also had to protect my business. Harlan was the type to snoop, maybe even claim I'd used family resources to build Verna's threads. I met with a lawyer named Grover, a friend of Otis's, who helped me trademark my brand and lock down my contracts. "You're airtight," Grover said, grinning over his coffee-stained desk. "No one's touching this." It cost me a chunk of savings, but it was worth it. The Kincaids weren't getting a single stitch of what I'd built. Toby's doctors gave me hope, saying he could go home soon if he kept improving. I started planning for that, moving us to a better apartment, closer to a good school, away from the Kincaids' shadow. I told Thelma about it one night as she checked Toby's chart. "You're doing right by him," she said, her eyes kind. "Family's who you choose, not who you're stuck with." Her words stuck, and I thought of Mavis, Otis, Thelma, my real support, the ones who showed up without an agenda. The Kincaids didn't take my silence well. A week after the dinner, Sissy's fiancé, Percy, showed up at the hospital, all slick smiles and cologne. "We're worried about you," he said, like he'd ever cared. I saw through it. Harlan probably sent him to gauge my success. I told him to leave, my voice cold. "Tell them I'm done," I said. He left, muttering, but I felt stronger, like I'd drawn a line in concrete. The Kincaids could keep their estate, their galas, their image. I had Toby, Verna's threads, and a life that was mine. As I sat by Toby's bed, watching him sleep, I knew these boundaries weren't just for now, they were forever. Toby came home a week later, his smile weak but real, and I felt like I could breathe again. Our tiny apartment was cluttered with his toys and my sewing machine, but it was ours, a sanctuary from the Kincaids' world. Verna's threads was booming, Harlow & Co. signed the contract, and my designs were hitting stores in spring. The Vogue mention kept orders rolling in, and Mavis hired 2 more part-timers to keep up. I was exhausted, juggling motherhood and business, but every time Toby laughed or I saw my dresses online, it was worth it. The Kincaids' name had always been a weight, a reminder of their expectations. Now, I was ready to redefine it on my terms. I started by giving back. Toby's hospital stay had racked up bills, but the Harlow deal gave me breathing room. I set up a fund at the hospital, named after Toby, to help other families with medical costs. Thelma cried when I told her, saying it'd make a difference for kids like Toby. It wasn't about fame. It was about turning our pain into something good. I also partnered with a local youth center, teaching sewing classes to teens who reminded me of myself. Dreamers with no one in their corner. One girl, a shy 15-year-old named Lila, made a skirt that brought tears to my eyes. "You're good at this," I told her, and her grin was brighter than any Kincaid gala. Verna's threads became more than a business. It was a mission. I launched a line inspired by Toby, bright, bold clothes for kids, with a portion of profits going to the hospital. Customers loved the story, and sales spiked. Mavis called it marketing gold, but to me, it was personal. Every stitch was a promise to Toby, a way to honor his fight. The Kincaids had used their name to open doors for themselves. I was using it to lift others up. Harlan and Sissy would have called it naive, but I didn't care. Their world was built on appearances. Mine was built on heart. I kept the Kincaids at a distance, but I heard whispers through old friends. Doreen was devastated by my betrayal, spinning it like I'd abandoned them. Harlan was sniffing around asking about my deal's valuation, probably hoping to muscle in. Sissy sent a letter, all flowery apologies, but I didn't respond. Their name might be on my birth certificate, but I was done letting it define me. I was Verna Kincaid, mother, designer, survivor, not their footnote. I framed one of Toby's drawings, a wonky superhero in a cape, and hung it in my workspace. That was my legacy, not their estate. The youth center threw a small showcase for the sewing class, and Lila's skirt stole the show. Parents clapped, kids cheered, and I felt a pride deeper than any Vogue mention. Toby was there, still recovering but clapping louder than anyone. Afterward, he hugged me and said, "You're my hero, Mom." I held him tight, my eyes stinging. The Kincaids could keep their wealth, their control. I'd built something better, a name that meant love, resilience, and second chances. As I tucked Toby into bed that night, I looked at the sketches pinned to my wall, new designs, new dreams. The Kincaids had tried to erase me, but I'd rewritten the story. Their name was mine now, tied to Toby's smile and the kids I was helping. I wasn't just reclaiming it, I was making it mean something real. Toby's laughter filled our new apartment, a cozy two-bedroom we'd moved into after his discharge. He was back to school, his energy returning, and I'd catch him sketching superheroes at the kitchen table, his crayons a riot of color. Verna's Threads was thriving. Harlow & Co. stores were prepping my line, and the Toby Fund was helping families at the hospital. Mavis and I were planning a second youth center workshop, and Lila, my star student, was designing her first dress. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, built from grit and love, not the Kincaids' approval. As I sat on our couch, a mug of tea in hand, I realized something. I wasn't fighting for their validation anymore. My worth was my own. Looking back, I saw how much I'd carried. Their judgment, my fear of failing Toby. The dinner had been a breaking point, but it wasn't the end. It was the start of seeing myself clearly. The Kincaids had offered a love that came with chains, and I'd spent years thinking I needed it to be whole. But Toby's smile, Mavis's loyalty, Thelma's kindness, Otis's Jell-O runs, those were the things that held me up. They didn't care about my last name or my bank account. They saw me, Verna, the woman who kept going, who sewed dreams into reality while her son fought to breathe. I thought about the girl I'd been, sketching dresses in the margins, hoping for a nod from Doreen or Willard. That girl had been brave, but she'd also been desperate, chasing a family that didn't exist. Now I was someone else, still brave but grounded. I didn't need their spotlight. I'd built my own, dimmer but truer. Verna's Threads wasn't just a business. It was proof I could create something lasting, something that mattered. Every dress, every kid I taught, every dollar to the Toby Fund was a piece of my heart, given freely. Toby climbed onto the couch, snuggling against me. "Can we make a cape for my hero?" he asked, holding up a drawing. I laughed, ruffling his hair. "You bet." As he chattered about colors, I felt a quiet peace settle in. The Kincaids were a shadow, distant and fading. They'd never know Toby's laugh or the weight of my choices, and that was okay. I didn't need their applause to know I'd won by choosing love over loyalty, Toby over their legacy, myself over their mold. The future was open, full of sketches and possibilities. I'd keep designing, keep teaching, keep showing Toby what it means to stand tall. My worth wasn't in their eyes or even in Verna's Thread's success. It was in me, in the way I loved, fought, and rose. That was enough. Have you ever had to choose between who you are and what others expect you to be? I'm Verna, and my fight for Toby and myself taught me that real love doesn't come with conditions. It's in the people who show up, the dreams you chase, the strength you find when everything's on the line. I'd love to hear your stories. Drop them in the comments below. What's a moment when you had to stand up for your truth? If my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. You don't need anyone's permission to be enough. You already are.